Welcome into the show, everybody. Christian Ojackson here with special guest John Walker. He covers Creighton for the Omaha World Herald. Thank you for being here with me, John.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. Yeah, we had some difficulties on my end getting everything set up, but I'm glad that we're getting to talk some ball.
So Ryan Kalkbrenner's gone, and he has just been the anchor of this defense and this program for the past 4 years, four-time DPOY. And with Alan Huss coming in from High Point, coming off a really good season for them, with him coming over as the head coach in waiting and just a lot different this year, kind of overall, can you just give me an assessment of just the temperature of the program and how Greg McDermott's feeling entering this season?
Yeah, I think I remember writing last offseason that it was the transition from one era to the next. Entering this last season, the storyline was that they had lost Trey Alexander, they had lost Baylor Shireman, both to the NBA, and for the first time in his career, it was Ryan Kalkbrenner's team. Now, in some ways, as a leader and whatnot, it might have been previously, but like this was his team for all intents and purposes, and it was that, but we didn't know that a year ago how everything was going to play out. So there was some uncertainty, but you knew the guy who had won, back to back or three straight Defensive Player of the Year awards in the Big East was going to be okay leading a team. That is all gone this offseason, because if last offseason was the transition from one era to the next, we are in the new era. Positively, absolutely. Kalk, gone. He's in the NBA now. They lost two other impactful transfers in seniors in Jemiah Neal and Stephen Ashworth. So we knew entering this offseason, this summer, that they were going to have to completely overhaul the roster because it was just time for that with how everything had lined up. And then you throw in the early offseason wrinkle that, yes, they bring back Alan Huss, a rising coaching candidate in this cycle, would have been one of the top coaching candidates in next year's cycle if his third year at High Point had gone anyway, like the first two. And I think that it would have. So knowing the end is near, Mac has said, Greg McDermott has said, sometime when the time's right. We figure that to be sometime in the next couple of years, couple of seasons, but he says when the time's right. So knowing the end is near, whenever the time is right, Creighton went ahead and implemented a succession plan that it didn't know it'd be able to, and brought back Alan Huss to, be the coach in waiting. So there's two head coaches on staff really now. It's a whale of a staff in that regard, and behind a solid core of returners and one of the top transfer hauls this offseason. The Jays are looking to get back to the second weekend of the tournament for the fourth time in 6 years.
Essentially two head coaches, like you just said, and the personnel on this team. Offensively, I feel like the ceiling is so high. We'll get to those defensive questions, but offensively, the team looks really enticing. I want to start with these two transfers from Iowa. You bring in Owen Freeman, 17-7, 2 blocks a game last year, gets hurt, and then had 2 surgeries. I know he's going to be coming back to basketball activity soon, but then him and then Josh Dix, who really came on last year as a sniper, but really a do-it-all scorer and an initiator at the guard position as well. Tell me about these two guys, an update on Owen's health and expectations for them as two of the best players on this team next year.
Yeah, let's start with Owen's health, because that's kind of the big preseason storyline. That happened over the summer, that between kind of the first and second session of summer workouts, they send the guys home. That's common with every program, as you know. And in that time when Owen Freeman was back home, he was playing pickup, came down, felt something weird, didn't think it was right, but it didn't hurt enough to keep him off the court. So then they came back to campus and he saw the trainer, realized it was still bugging him. And that's when they realized that he tore his meniscus. And that's not what you want for your starting center, knowing that there's already so much ground to cover replacing Ryan Kalkbrenner. And then the guy, the successor, the replacement, tears his meniscus. That is a nightmare scenario. In theory, Owen could have played through it, but it only would have affected him more and more as the season went on. And I think Creighton and Owen realized the upside of going ahead and doing the surgery and letting that maybe slow down his acclimation process. That the harm it could do in November was easier to withstand than the harm it could have possibly done in March. So they went ahead and did that. And then, yes, they brought in one of his former teammates as well. I think a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks after, in Josh Dix. And so they were two of the top players in the portal. Josh Dix was a consensus top 20 portal prospect. Owen Freeman was the consensus second-rated center in the portal. And so you immediately think, okay, well, these guys are pretty solid, and we understand that. But how did Iowa just do that then? If these guys are as good as they were touted to be, and then you really dive into the film, and I think you can see where things will line up and how it can work in Greg McDermott's system, because then you say, okay, well, if they did that at Iowa, what can they do at Creighton? What can they do in the Big East? What can they do in a system that'll, essentially run through those two guys? It's a back to the basket league. You know that UConn's hanging in the back. Like the Big East has long been a back to the basket league. And Owen Freeman is one of the better back to the basket bigs in the country. And then they have to replace the scoring. They have to replace the on-ball playmaking that Stephen Ashworth, that Jemiah Neal brought last year. And Josh Dix is going to be a huge huge part in that if Creighton wants to reach the ceiling that it has in mind. And so, yeah, they're going to be crucial to this team in different ways. But if Creighton wants to approach its ceiling for this season, the two Iowa transfers are going to have a huge part in that, especially when Owen Freeman's fully cleared.
A few more of these transfers to get to. Next, I want to talk about Nick Graves coming over from Charlotte. Really productive guard, 18 points a game, not great efficiency, 42% from the field for a bad Charlotte team too. He didn't make all-conference honors or anything like that, but he's fifth in the league in scoring. Tell me about the fit of Nick Graves coming over here from Charlotte and what their plans are for him.
Yeah, kind of in the similar vein of Ryan Kalkbrenner, like entering last season, Creighton knew that this offseason they would have to replace Stephen Ashworth. There's been some pretty darn good point guards here the past few years. Like they went from Ryan Nembhard to a small-time Utah State transfer named Stephen Ashworth. And at the time it was like, how does this work out? And then Stephen was phenomenal in his 2 seasons at Creighton, especially last season, his farewell tour. So they had to replace that. They have a freshman, now a sophomore, Ty Davis on the roster. And Ty is very promising for a young talent, but it's so hard to replace a fifth-year senior with a sophomore. It's so hard to do that in today's game, and it's possible, but the younger guy has to be like blowing people out of the water. And so they bring in Nick Graves, get some experience. He'll be a senior. Drastically different system at Creighton than he ran at Charlotte. He wanted to get up and down the floor, and that was just not Charlotte's system. They're going to get down and defend, and then they'll walk the ball up, and with 15 seconds left in the shot clock, then they'll get into a set. But the one thing that really intrigues me about Nick Graves is, yes, the experience that he'll bring, and ensure he'll fill the void in the scoring as far as scoring's concerned. And what they lost in Kalkbrenner and Jemiah Neal and Stephen Ashworth. But as good as Stephen Ashworth was from outside, he didn't apply heavy rim pressure. That was like not his game as a 6-foot guard. And Nick Graves does that. He shot the 15th most free throws in the country last year. And so I think his game could look drastically different than it does this year at Creighton than it did the last 3 at Charlotte. But when you really get down to the bones of his game, I think it meshes well in Greg McDermott's system, especially with what this team in particular will need from the one spot.
Jackson McAndrew coming back, a guy who really impressed me. The way that he got more comfortable as the season went along. Obviously, the shooting at that size jumps off the page. He's definitely on watch list for kind of an under the radar NBA guy.
For sure.
So tell me more about Jackson McAndrew, what his off seasons looked like, and other than being that sniper at that size, what kind of other parts of his game he's been developing.
Yeah, he's always kind of had a nice little bag for real. That's just like, I don't know how many times since Doug McDermott left campus, Creighton has like played through a wing that puts their back to the basket and backs someone down. So that's just like not like Jackson McAndrew was never going to be asked to do that as a freshman. But he has that part to his game. And so I'm really interested in seeing just how expanded his role is in year 2. Greg McDermott's talked this offseason like he's going to be an NBA player sooner than later, largely because of being 6'10" and shooting 35, 36% from 3. Like NBA teams are licking their chops at the potential there. But until then, he should settle into a pretty large role at Creighton as a sophomore. One of the big parts of his offseason was reconstructing his body. He only added 5 pounds this offseason, but he looks more like an NBA prospect, like a big-time college basketball player. And so that was I tweeted after Creighton's first practice, and said Jackson, looks stronger. He said he feels stronger, and he put 5 pounds on, and everybody was like, 5 pounds? Like, I'll go to Taco Bell and put 5 pounds on. And I'm like, well, that's true. Like, I could do that too, and Jackson could have, but the body composition was the big part, and so he looks like the player he aspires to be now, and he stepped up as a leader as well, huge because of the leadership that Creighton lost with Ryan Kalkbrenner being drafted and graduating at that. So yeah, Jackson McAndrew has been huge on and off the floor this offseason, and I fully expect that to continue into the winter, and Creighton's going to need it too.
Blake Harper coming over from Howard, freshman of the year and player of the year out of the MEAC, 20 points a game, 6 boards, 3 assists, and shot 40% from deep. So really interesting profile, another kind of sleeper NBA guy. But, I feel like Blake Harper, from what I watched of him at Howard, was just kind of clearly just in the wrong league, just like way more talented those guys and had the ball a lot. So I'm kind of curious, moving to the Big East, how different his game looks. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he will play on the ball a lot, but I'm just thinking with Graves and Dix and wanting to play through Freeman down low, that he is kind of more of an off-ball guy. But tell me what you kind of expect for Blake Harper here.
Yeah, I that's the biggest question, right? Is how, and Greg McDermott brought this up earlier in the offseason. I think we talked to them in July, and it's like, there's an obvious question of how Blake handles the transition from the MEAC to the Big East. The second game of his Creighton career is at Gonzaga. We've come a long way from the MEAC. And he played some good competition last year. I think one of his first or second games in college was at Kansas. So he's no stranger to that spotlight. But it's a lot different when you get into February and you're playing Georgetown on a Wednesday night instead of a team in the MEAC. So that'll be an evolving thing over the season. But in the immediate future, he's going to have to carve out a role early, and I think he will. But there's just a log jam on the wings. You have Josh Dix, you have Fedor Zugic, you have 4-star freshman Hudson Greer, who is impressed all offseason. And then you have Blake Harper, who is an NBA prospect in his own right. So yeah, I think he definitely has a role off the ball. Now that's not like everyone in Greg McDermott's offense is an initiator in one way or another. So playing off the ball is not a diminishing role like it is some places, and every system's different. But at Creighton, yeah, I think he could be a more off the ball player than we saw at Howard, because why would you not put the ball in his hands if you're Howard? You know what I mean? Like that's a guy who touches it every single possession and probably ends every single possession. So he's not going to be asked to do that at Creighton. So long meandering way to say it's murky, his role entering the season, but he can certainly carve one out. But you've got a few other guys who are trying to do the same thing.
Let's get into some of those guys. Zugic, Jason Green, Isaac Trout are the three guys coming back last year who kind of got real minutes. I know Trout, would be in the doghouse and not played all some games. Green would give some strong lifts, but that offensive progression never really came, 27% from deep. And then Zugic, another guy who only 12 minutes a game, but you see the upside with him and his skill and, another year in the system. I'll kind of throw it to you to tell me about which of those guys you could expect something most different from this year.
Isaac Trout's the one that intrigues me the most. He's, I think, the best shooter of the three, and we know how well that bodes in Creighton's offense. But Jason Green has the best upside as a defender. Like he can genuinely guard 1 through 5. They had Jason Green on Janai Broom for some of last year's second round matchup, and for the most part, more than most people had all season last year, held his own. Now it helps when you have an NBA rim protector hovering behind. So you can take a little bit more risk than other people can. But yeah, Jason Green is a really impressive defender. And so in a Creighton lineup that seems to lack that, is he the guy you want on the wing? And then you have Fedor Zugic, who wasn't cleared until midway through last season. He's an international prospect from Montenegro. Wasn't cleared until December. Never thought he would be cleared. So it really took him a minute to find his footing. And so that's why he only played, 12 minutes a game last year? Is that what it was?
And so, that, he played sparingly in the first games, but he didn't really play until like mid-January. Exactly.
So there was really, really an unexpected acclimation process to get Fedor Zugic on the floor last year. And Creighton didn't expect him to be cleared, nor did Fedor. So, yeah, it was just really interesting. And he had some eligibility dispute this year, but he was cleared. So, this was his first full off season at Creighton. And I think he greatly, greatly, greatly benefited from it. I've said all offseason, if Fedor Zugic is not one of Creighton's starters, I don't project him to be currently. And if he's not, I think he's the leading candidate for Big East Sixth Man of the Year.
Oh, wow.
His comfortability in Greg McDermott's system is so apparent through the first couple of weeks of practices. It's night and day from where it was a year ago. And so there were times last year where he would be too busy thinking to play basketball. And I think that first part's gone now. I think that he can just play basketball. So he was really impressive in flashes. Crucial to a couple of wins last season, especially the home game against Xavier. That was really his kind of coming out party as far as his importance to this team. Because Xavier ran a lot of 4-guard lineups with Zach Freemantle at the 5, and Creighton didn't have the personnel for it. And so they had to trust Fedor, and he delivered in that moment. They played St. John's in the Big East tournament final, and he went down a couple minutes into that game, and Creighton's backcourt play was never the same. I don't know if that stopped St. John's from hitting 14 straight in the second half, but maybe it helped somewhere in the in-between. Um, so yeah, his role is crucial, was crucial, and now that he's had a full off season, and Greg McDermott plans to play more players more minutes. He says, you would only think that helps out Fedor Zugic in his second season. Certainly not a sophomore, not your average sophomore anyway.
Right. Tell me about this freshman Hudson Greer. You said good reviews from him this offseason.
Yeah. I had spoken to a few assistants early into summer workouts and was just like, hey, what's up? How are things? And both of them mentioned Hudson Greer, like unprompted. That wasn't the first thing, but it was like, okay, he showed up to campus ready to work. I was told that not by one of the assistants, I was told separately that Hudson skipped the USA basketball tryouts so that he could get to Creighton campus earlier, and just get acclimated in the system. So like he was very committed to getting here and putting the work in, and by all accounts he has. He's really impressed the staff so far. I was impressed in the couple of practices that I watched over the summer, and then here through the first couple of weeks of official practices. So I again, for the same reasons we talked about with Blake Harper, like it's hard to see how the wing ends up playing out. But man, I think it's going to be incredibly hard to not play Hudson Greer this year.
Alexa Dimitrovic coming over from Serbia, 7'1". I heard some. I like that. Is there? I read something about there being a little confusion whether it was his eligibility or something of that nature. But I saw Creighton posted a video of him the other week. So he's on campus. Is he ready to go? Is he potentially a guy who could develop into a piece that's being used this year?
Yeah, I think so. It was really interesting because he was just waiting. There might have been eligibility stuff. I'm not positive on that front, but when I reach out to his representation, he was just waiting for his visa and passport to get cleared, like to come in. And as soon as that came in, from my understanding, he came overseas and arrived at Creighton. That wasn't until the middle of August. So you in theory, you would have loved for that to have been earlier. But yeah, he's on campus. He's good. He's practicing. He recently returned to practice because 3 workouts in, he broke his nose. So he's wearing like the Batman LeBron mask currently. And yeah, he's good. And I truthfully see him as more of a developmental project. Like that one redshirt year or 1 year waiting in the wings would do him so well. I really do. Because he's not going to play significant minutes this year anyway, because you have Owen Freeman. And Owen Freeman will be there next year as well, or at least we think. Like he has 2 years of eligibility. Who knows what happens between now and the beginning of next season. But yeah, I really think a year kind of waiting, getting accustomed to Creighton would suit Alexa Dimitrovic super well. Because then late in the summer, with one roster spot open, they went and signed another international prospect in Kerem Conan. So they get him as well. He's been playing some of the 5 in some of the early runs. Again, kind of the same thing that they're going to have to do with Owen when he's healthy, is like quickly getting them acclimated and doing that as quickly as possible, to help the team handle a pretty lofty or a pretty loaded non-con schedule before diving into Big East play. So that's where they're at right now. So as far as Alexa Dimitrovic goes, I know I just rambled. As far as Alexa Dimitrovic goes, very talented, loves to defend the rim. And I think that's why Creighton was drawn to him and why he was drawn to Creighton, because he could see what a 7'1" center can do on that defense. And I think that he is probably still a year away from being the player that he aspires to be in Creighton system.
Not to compare him to Kalkbrenner, I just remember Kalkbrenner coming in as very project. He was
Yep.
a project
Yep.
thing, and he,
Yep.
contributed as a freshman, then, just took off as a sophomore. But the reason I still have Kalkbrenner on my mind is because defensively, he shaped everything they did for however many years. So, like, for Creighton, the last 4 years was top 5 in the country in the least amount of fouls committed, or foul rate, and then, just top 10 2 of the last 4 years in terms of 3-point attempts allowed. So it's a lot of just running guys on the 3-point line, forcing them into Kalkbrenner, trying to have them shoot over the top, and things like that. So
Yeah.
defensively and schematically, how and it translated to last year was their worst defensive year, but 3 top 25 defenses the years before that. How different schematically do you think this defense looks without Ryan Kalkbrenner? Do you try to play the same system, or are McDermott and Huss just in the lab, like, trying to think of how to scheme best to fit the personnel?
No, that's I remember what the first practice. I think the first official practice. Mac had said, like, we're just throwing stuff at the wall, and not in like a we have no clue way, but in just a what works best. Because then the other thing to remember is, like, they're going to try and figure out a defensive system and then get their starting center back.
Right.
It's so tough to do that. And Greg McDermott talked about that. He's like, we know the player Owen is, but, like, we don't know really because we haven't been able to have him in practice. So yeah, that really they're not going to anchor in a drop coverage like they have the last 4 years. Top 70 or top 25 Ken Palm defenses 3 of the past 4 years. Last year was the worst of Ryan Kalkbrenner's 4 years, and I think they were still top 50.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, he just covered so much ground, and last year there were so many things, so many holes they had to cover defensively, and early they were so positionally small with Stephen Ashworth at the 1 and Pop Isaacs at the 2, that the defensive holes were glaring early. So it got better as the season went on, but now it's so completely different because you don't have the 4-time Big East depoy back there. And so, yeah, Greg McDermott, Alan Huss, now they're trying to figure out what the best method is. I'd imagine certainly more so than the past handful of years. Creighton is going to use a mix of zone and man, probably more man, if I had to guess. But they're going to do a little bit of everything. They'll turn to a drop coverage at some point. Not that Owen Freeman at 6'10" is Ryan Kalkbrenner, but he's an okay shot blocker too. I think he averaged two blocks a game at Iowa last season, before needing season-ending finger surgery. So yeah, it'll look different, no doubt, positively, absolutely, no doubt. But they don't have an answer now, to tell you the honest truth, and I think it'll be an evolving answer over the season, because they're just not rooted in any defensive identity entering the season like they were the past 4 years under Ryan Kalkbrenner.
That's definitely the X factor, but with the coaching tandem of McDermott and Huss, the rest of the staff, and some key returners, a lot of offensive talent, and some fun mystery boxes in guys like Harper, Graves, even Greer, of what they can be. There's a lot to be excited about, and I think this will be a fun team that puts up a lot of points, at the very least, and puts Creighton in a position to absolutely be in the NCAA tournament once again. But any final notes, nuggets, flag plants before I get you out of here, John?
No, it's it'll be a fun season, not just to Creighton, across the country. Last season was so fun. In one game I always look forward to every year, as you can imagine, is Dan Hurley and the Huskies coming to Omaha. That's such a fun night. Like the Creighton crowd gets so rowdy. Hurley gets rowdy in a lot of ways. Last year's game, like Liam McNeely went crazy in the second half, and then moments later, everyone knows the 2 rings Baldy. So that happened in Omaha. That game never fails. So ready for that one. I'm really just ready for the season to get going. In Creighton's November 5th opener against South Dakota could not be here soon enough.
Awesome. There you have it. The Creighton Blue Jays. Thanks for coming on the show, John.